Hello, this is HH and HRS from BRTW going over the Revolution Now application, all the various things that you need to know about the program so that you can make your application as strong as possible. The application itself is relatively straightforward. We're going to ask for your name, email address, pronouns, obviously, the first few pages of your script. We're going to want to know that it adheres to the basic by us, for us checklist. Is it by a Black writer? Is it in service of the Black community? Does it feature Black characters? These kinds of things.
And this particular info session is going to also highlight just some of the tips, tools, and trades of what writing crafts, so narrative tips as well, and really just highlighting all the ways that we can make you successful in applying for Revolution Now.
Yeah, so let's get into it, starting with the stuff that you really want to know. What are the benefits of the program?
So the benefits of the program is that this is a new play development supporting from BRTW producers. These pieces will be produced for audio, so while you're welcome to use your piece for theater, film, short stories, etc., there will also be a focus on writing to craft the best audio experience.
Also, the last Melanated Monday of 2021 in December is dedicated just to the 2021 Revolution Now cohort. So you won't be expected to share your entire pieces, but just sections of that piece as part of the Melanated Monday. And then the community conversation will also be focused on you. And of course, money. You get paid $250 to be in this program. And then in 2022, we're going to produce your work for the Black Revolutionary Media podcast. We have directors, dramaturgs, producers, and of course, audio producers. So you won't be expected to provide any of that production support. All of that will be provided for you. But if there are people that you would like to have on board, if there are actors that you have in mind that you just heard in their voice and we can afford them, feel free to let us know. If you're like, I need Andre DeShields in my piece. I also need Andre DeShields in my piece.
And we all need Andre DeShields in our piece.
Exactly. And we're all going to be disappointed.
So what makes you eligible for Revolution Now? You are Black. So if you are a Black writer, if you are a Black writer and you don't happen to live in New York, are you still eligible? So this program is specifically designed for all Black writers throughout the diaspora to be eligible to apply as long as you're eligible to be paid within the United States. Meaning, if you reside in Kansas, you can apply. If you reside in Toronto, can you get paid in US dollars? That's how we differentiate your eligibility.
Exactly. There are some additional things, of course. You have to be over 18. And you have to be down to commit to responding to your emails. In order for you to get the kind of dramaturgical, directorial, production support to make your piece as strong as possible, you have to be in communication with some people. Communication will be primarily over email with Zoom meetings with a member of the BRTW production team. Will you be able to work with other BRTW producers? Yes. Will you be able to participate in other programs like Writer's Block in order to strengthen your work? Absolutely. Can you apply to additional Melanated Mondays? Sure. But while you're working in Revolution Now specifically, you have to be on top of your emails and you have to be showing up for those meetings, which are going to be negotiated based on your availability and the availability of the producer who's on your team. So if you can't stay on top of those, this program isn't for you.
Something we also want to highlight is that you don't have to have direct experience making theater projects, but you must have a completed piece that you're willing to commit to as part of your first production. So for instance, if you did not graduate with a theater background like I did, but graduated with an English literature background or creative writing background, you're more than welcome to apply. But that does not mean you have to have a certain education level. Just as long as you're able to clearly articulate your story, your character development, your prose, and why you want to share the story with the world is what we are looking for in our applicants.
Yes. And I want to hone in on this completed piece part of this, because really this is a suggestion. We want to know that you have the follow through to start a project and finish it. chances are that's highest with people who've already started a project and finished it. If you haven't, please let us know. That tells us we need to meet you with additional levels of support. There, I think, we both can speak to experiences where we're on a project and the only reason why we're finishing the project is because we need to finish the project. But getting over that hill is a real thing. That said, you can apply to Revolution Now with an idea. You can apply to Revolution Now with something that you have written but needs a lot of editing. What you can't apply to Revolution Now with is something that's already been premiered, something that's already been fully produced. This is new work development. So if it's a play, if it's a script, if it's an audio drama, if it's a short story, if it's a choreo poem, all of those things are fine, but they have to be in a place where they're still open to getting work.
Absolutely. So Heather, we talked a little bit about commitment to this program, requiring email responsiveness within 1 to 2 business days, but is Revolution Now something that we're going to do in person?
Not at this juncture. In the future, possibly. I don't want to completely take it off the table. BRTW's position on the pandemic right now is that we are not in a place to be certain that by in-person gathering for this particular program, we can guarantee the safety of our artists and our participants. And that is the most important thing.
Because community care is part of Black care. So we are not in the expense of wanting to risk our community members to meet in person, especially for those that are under-resourced, underserved, autoimmunocommed, and or have accessibility needs. So we really want to prioritize making sure anyone within the Black diaspora can participate. So something else that can come up is you might have a piece that is less theatrical and more conceptual. Our work in Revolution Now is going to help adapt your piece to a fully functioning production. So we're hoping to make sure that we allow you the resources and the time to work through these concepts, work through these projects to make sure that your story is the one that you want to speak out into the world.
I also want to speak a bit on what that adaptation process is. So this piece is yours. You retain the intellectual property for this piece. This is something that you can decide to have for any number of ways. In terms of our focus for adaptation is that we want to get it presentation ready. And the way that any project that comes to Revolution Now is going to be presented is via audio drama. So we will work with you to make sure that this piece is going to work to be successful in an audio format, which means let's not spend half of the runtime reading stage directions. That's for our usual theater people, or camera directions for our screenwriters. Poetry can work on audio drama. Short stories can work on audio drama. Obviously, audio dramas work on audio drama. And theater and film work really well to be adapted for audio drama. So that's one of the ways that we plan to be available for you. But we also plan to be available for you for just general writing support to help make sure that your narrative is as strong as possible. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of that just a little bit later.
Absolutely. So something that might come up as a question is, are you expected to act in your own piece? Ha 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 ha, negative. If you are paying attention to the top of this info session, BRTW provides all of the production needs, including actors, performers, voice instructors, or coaches, in order to be able to produce your piece to the quality that you see it to come to fruition. So you don't have to worry about performing your own piece, but you do have to worry about creating a piece that is performable for anyone who's having fresh eyes on it. Now, that does not mean that there is a limit to actors or voices that you are in your piece, but do take that into consideration when you're writing. So for instance, if you're writing a piece that has 20 roles, is that something that's going to support you in your project? Maybe, maybe not. Perhaps though, if you have a piece with 5 to 6 characters, that is something that can be negotiable, because we're of the school of thought that we want all of our actors, performers, and writers to really be able to dive into the work that they are negotiating and presenting.
Absolutely. One writing rule of thumb that I deeply value specifically for writing for performance is the idea of no spear carriers. If someone's job is to come on stage and carry a spear, that worked for Shakespeare. In the 21st century, what are they doing to move the plot around? What are they doing to move the action? What do they want? If these are questions that we can't answer for these characters, do they need to be present? And aside from that, just for a production level, If you have more than, say, 5 or 6 roles, we'll probably start looking at doubling them up. If that's something that would underserve your narrative, maybe that's not the narrative to apply for this piece or to apply for this program. And if that is the narrative that you want to apply for this program, then keep in mind more than 5 or 6 characters, we'll probably start looking at doubling up, start thinking about how that can best serve your narrative. What are the kind of voices and qualities that need to be there?
So Heather, something that might also come up is if your project has a lot of sounds. Do you need someone experienced or capable doing Foley arts? And if that's accessible to our applicants?
Absolutely is. We have an amazing audio producer who's actually worked on all of the existing Revolution Now podcasts and has helped on even some of the older podcast episodes that we've had. Ranshia, who's a very, well-respected audio producer, sound engineer, and sound designer. Obviously Foley arts is more specific to film. Ran comes from a theater and audio background. That said, she still has access to a vast sound library and can give you an excellent quality of work.
Awesome. So in case of emergency, what happens if you request a portion of the stipend to be paid out before completing the program?
As a general rule of thumb, that is not something that we do. However, if you are experiencing an emergency and you're in the program, depending upon your situation, you can always ask. If it's something that we can't make happen, if it's something that we have to talk to a legal professional to, double check about, there unfortunately might be some hoops. I would say this is not the program to participate in if you need cash on a very specific, like, I need this 2 months early. That's not something I can absolutely guarantee. However, the current structure of the program is that you are paid once there is a finished project. If there's not a finished project by a certain deadline, you have not completed the program. And that gets into, allocation of grant funds, that gets into allocation of sponsor funds, that gets into a really sticky situation. So there are some situations where we're limited by, can we disperse monies for this particular program before the program has been completed, or if somebody has not, fit within the rubrics of this program.
Absolutely. And so under certain circumstances may disqualify you from Revolution Now or remove you early from the program. So as Heather mentioned, not having a completed work during your cohort period. We really value accountability in terms of our writing process. We are not hammer hard about it, but however, we are creating work that is out for the public. If you're not able to meet your commitment in finishing a project and being able to answer your emails in a timely fashion based on your MOU, or not taking into account the feedback that BRTW staff and creative team offer you, those are some of the ways that can disqualify you from the program. Heather, are there any others you can think of?
Yeah, in order to start the program, as Heide mentioned, you do have to sign a contract. That said, the contract is open for negotiation. A contract is not something that we're just like handing down from the sky. There are some things that are just going to be non-negotiable, such as, like, the program's called Revolution Now. Part of, participating in the program is that we're going to produce it on the Revolution or Black Revolutionary Media podcast. All of those things are just a part of the program. If that's not something that you're comfortable with, it is reflected in the contract, and it's probably not something that you should pursue the program for if that's something that you're uncomfortable with. The stipend is $250. If we come into some money for this program and we can raise the stipend like we did last year, when I think originally we pitched the program opening up with a stipend of $150 and we were able to boost it, then we'll let you know. But that's not something that we can really negotiate about coming in. And so that's part of the reason why we want to be transparent about these things coming up, because if these are issues that come up in the contract negotiation phase, these aren't things that we can, really budge about. So signing the contract, responding to your producers, you are not legally required to take every note that is given to you. However, you should be at a point in your process where you can accept criticism, where you can engage thoughtfully with that criticism and back up your choices. And if you're at a point where this is so close, or, where that's not a part of your writing process that you're in, this isn't the program for you. And that's also fine. We all go through periods where we're very precious about our work. As Erykah Badu once famously said, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. And we all get that.
Yeah.
But if that sensitivity is not something that you can overcome in order to be productive, and I guarantee you, the dramaturgs, the directors, the actors, the producers that you're working with, they're going to be sensitive about your work. If that's not something that you can overcome, we're going to have to look at maybe you not continuing in this program.
Absolutely. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some writing and craft tips. So something that we're looking for in terms of your project that you submit for Revolution Now are narrative and plot. What's the story that you're telling? Does it prioritize Black folks in diaspora in your piece? What are your A, B, and C plots? By that, we mean, what is the main story that we're supposed to be observing? Are there secondary stories from different characters that move story A? Are there tertiary storylines that help move everything along? Are there any loose ends that come up? We're also going to be looking at character development. So what does each character want? Heather mentioned earlier, if you have a character that's a spear holder, does that spear holder actually help move your story along? Is it a reason for this character to show up? And what are some of your character's strengths, flaws, and values in their stories? We think so much of storytelling as a way to get in touch and reimagine our lived experiences. So we all know that we encounter individuals in our everyday life who are nuanced, who are complicated, who are sometimes not the greatest person, but we want to be able to see the value in all of their experiences in your story and in your plot. Do you have passive characters, and why are they passive characters? Heather, do you want to explain what passive characters mean for folks?
Yeah, so this distinction between passive and active characters really speaks to how a character moves plot, or if the plot only moves them, if the plot only acts on them. So for example, let's say you have a story about a single mother, and it's kind of a day in the life kind of story. If your story shows that, she wakes up in the morning and all of these various things happen to her and she's constantly responding to them, that can be an interesting story. She might be a passive character though. If everything that happens in the plot are these things that come externally and are happening to her, as opposed to if this is a single mother, she starts by going to the grocery store or something and looks up and sees someone stealing at the grocery store, and then gets really wrapped up in figuring out what their life is. And maybe she follows that person through town. Maybe she tries to track this person down, and maybe she recognizes them and sees if she can try and find them on social media. And the whole thing ends with a steamy love scene. That's an active character.
That's a good story. I want to read that now. What?
And as you can see by the response, we tend to be more invested in active characters because they're actively moving plot. That's not to say that you can't tell a good story with a passive character, but it's more difficult.
Absolutely. And something we're also looking for in your submission is, how are each of the characters' voices distinct? Mm-hmm. We often can interact or engage with individuals, but we know how someone talks, how they think, their cadence. These are all elements of what highlights a character to make them pop off the page. This helps you with your storytelling and in your prose. So we're also looking to see if there are scenes where the story comes through most clearly. Are there scenes where the story gets buried underneath a theme or an overarching point? Tying back to passive characters, are there points or moments where you are losing or not knowing who is telling what part of the story in your submission?
That also connects back to this first question: what story are you telling? One thing that a lot of writers can get caught up on is their characters, their themes, their motifs. Your theme is not your story. What your character wants could be a large part of your story. It could be how the story moves. Is it your story? Mm-hmm. That is something that you need to be able to answer well. And a good exercise for every writer is to be able to answer that question in as few words as possible in under 15 seconds.
That's what we call an elevator pitch. So we think so much of, if you were going to tell your story submission in 15 seconds, what are the best parts of this story and why should we be invested in it? That ability to tell your story in 15 seconds helps us to understand that you are thinking about structure in your piece. So if there are settings, if there are different times and places, what are they? Does the audience, or do we know what they are, and are they highlighted? And what purpose do your settings really show? And if there are multiple, why are there multiple settings, and what and how that propels your story? Are there any concepts and conceits that you're employing? So you want to think about what your audience is going to gain or understand by your piece. Not everyone has to love what your story. However, everyone has to have access to your story. And that's something BRTW prides in all of our production work. There's always going to be an element of the story that really, really resonates with either the lived experience as a Black person or what does it mean to be in community and diaspora.
Mm-hmm. And then this last big question, who is your story speaking to / who is your story speaking for? One thing that we've seen a lot in, white culture media that's supposed to be platforming Black experiences, Black stories, is that there tends to be this sensational and oftentimes fetishizing element where we're telling Black stories for white audiences. Or worse, we're telling a white perspective of a Black story for white audiences. This is an opportunity for Black writers to privilege their own experiences and how they're telling the story and their own experiences for audience. And so it shifts the question a bit about, does the audience have the information that they need? And you can start strategically thinking about it. Do you care if everyone who's potentially in your audience has access to Aave? Do you care if everyone in your audience knows what 4C hair is? Do you care if everyone in your audience has had the experience of smelling their own hair kind of getting cooked for their first silk press?
Absolutely.
So these are things that you get to take some liberties with, but keep all of these questions in mind because ultimately they're about good writing.
And something to also take note of is, if you want to use multiple languages or bilingual language in your piece, you have the space to do so. Just give us the caveat of what languages you're incorporating in. And I speak from the place of being first generation Haitian, and I incorporate a lot of Haitian Creole into my writing pieces, or inflections, or using French. If that is something that is necessary for your piece to move forward and really speaks to the characters and why they have to use various languages, know that that is part of your story, and BRTW will do everything we can to make sure we honor the quality of your piece.
Absolutely. And I love that that also brings out a different aspect of character voice as well, because one thing that we see handled poorly is this idea of like representing Blackness as a monolith. This is an opportunity to make sure that we're not doing that. And that's something that we're going to be assessing when we're just reading the samples from your pieces. If your characters have different experiences, if your characters have different cultural experiences, we as Black people know that we're diverse. And so if everyone sounds the same, if everyone sounds like they came from the same elementary school, the same cultural experience, went to the same, religious or cultural experience, religious experience, if everyone's eating the same meal, are they a part of a cult? Why? How are we differentiating them?
Absolutely. So all of these writing crafts and tips can be found on our rubric, which is on our website. And this is to help you do a self-assessment before you submit your piece, so that our BRTW production team can also see how you are willing to observe your piece and have a little bit of distance. It can be daunting when you're submitting work, and if you're too close to it, it can be difficult to really hold space for the feedback and changes, because often your story knows the direction it wants to go. And we as writers are often the stewards to make sure we're getting to the right place.
Absolutely. So if you don't already know, you can go to our website at thebrtw.org. The program that we're talking about is under our programs tab Revolution Now. It has everything that you need to put together a strong application. The application is right there, and that rubric is available for download.
And if you have any questions, you can email us at admin@thebrtw.org, and we are more than happy to answer any questions that our rubric and our info page or this info session has not quite met on the head.
Exactly. And that rubric is also going to be available after this program for Melanated Mondays or just for Black writers who are trying to strengthen their work. So with that, is there anything else you'd like to address today before we call this info session to a close?
We're so excited to read your pieces.
I thoroughly agree. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.